Hello colleagues, welcome once again to Sociology at Work. Today we've got our guest Eileen Clark, who's going to speak to us about medical sociology, but in particular we're looking at how to use sociology in the field of nursing. Welcome Eileen.
Hello Zalika, it's lovely to talk to you.
Thank you for joining us. So we're going to dive right in. Eileen, you've worked as a medical scientist in pathology and you worked in labs for 10 years before giving this work up to become a full-time mother. What prompted you to then go back and do a bachelor's doing sociology and psychology?
I guess I didn't have any planned career path in mind. I had gone into being a medical scientist after school. My year 12 was not good and I didn't get into university. This was in England, but I wanted to work in a scientific field, particularly in health science, and I had learned about medical technology, medical science at a careers show, and I wrote around to local hospitals and one of them employed me. And at that stage it was an apprenticeship model, so I studied at TAFE at night and worked during the day, and I really loved that career for 10 years. But one of the features of that career is that you had to be available 24 hours a day for emergency call-outs. And that was just not compatible with motherhood when my husband, although he had a very different career, he also had to be on call 24 hours a day. So I left work, became a full-time mother, found it a very big transition because we had also moved from the city to the country and I had nothing in the way of social supports. And it was about the time that Charles Sturt, what is now Charles Sturt University, was offering classes in Albury where I live. And so I thought, as a sociologist, I cringed to say this, I thought that I'd trained to be a teacher because that was a good job for mothers. So I started doing a teaching course and found that I loved the theoretical subjects. I loved child psychology and theories of education. Absolutely hated the practical, having to do anything with kids. So as soon as the opportunity came along, I switched from doing teaching to doing a BA. And I didn't want to do history or English, but psychology and sociology really appealed to me. And so that's how I ended up doing a sociology degree and with a psychology major as well.
That's so interesting because usually we find our graduates in BA courses at least do the opposite, where they do a general BA and then go into teaching. So it's interesting you took the different path.
Yes, well, certainly it reflects how things have changed. In those days, when I started out, a lot of teachers were still only 2-year trained, and the universities were offering them the opportunity to get a degree. And then they widened that to anyone. I guess at the time also they were probably desperate to get students because they were starting up in a new town and trying to build a presence. So that's how I ended up there.
So after you completed your bachelor's course, you went into teaching and you were teaching sociology, but a range of courses, but then you actually shifted, along with university changes, shifted to teaching nursing and welfare, which actually led to a 20-year career.
Yes.
So you focused on specifically teaching sociology and research methods, which I would consider being an applied practice because you can actually tell us about how it is that other disciplines can take on board sociological knowledge. So that was something that I wanted you to tell us about. What was it like transitioning your knowledge aimed specifically at sociology students and then moving towards nursing majors? What were some of the difficulties and the opportunities that you saw?
It was a big change. When you're teaching in a course like a BA, students enroll in sociology because they have some knowledge or interest as to what sociology might offer. When I switched to teaching nursing, the biggest challenge, and I think many people will tell you this, the biggest challenge in teaching sociology in nursing is making it relevant. The students come into a Bachelor of Nursing course, perhaps inspired by television dramas and the like. They want to learn practical stuff. They want to learn drugs. They want to learn how to feed patients and do all that sort of thing. And then to find that in the first year of their course, they're faced with a substantial amount of theoretical work, and sociology in particular. They say, why do we need to know this? And so as a lecturer, your biggest challenge is to make it relevant. And I think it was useful that I had at least some familiarity with hospital environments and the health sciences in general when I started teaching. One of the best years was, well, one of the best courses I taught in, we actually had sociology in third year, after the students had been out on placement, after they had often been to the city for the first time and seen what a diversity of people front up to a busy city hospital. They came back and would say, now I see the relevance. But, hitting them with a lot of sociology in the first 6 months was quite difficult. And in the 20 years that I was working, the courses changed appreciably, so that there was much less emphasis on, certainly on sociological theory. And by the time that I finished from that, working in that area, we were in fact teaching what was called social determinants of health, so making it very applied and hopefully very relevant.
It's funny when sociology gets tacked onto courses. I mean, I found myself doing something similar. It was actually my first year of teaching sociology, so I wasn't that experienced as a sociology teacher, and I ended up teaching a tutorial full of environmental scientists who weren't told why they were there. I wasn't even told that I'd be teaching a group of environmental scientists. And it was Sociology 101, so, it's very heavy on theory and concepts, and we had a really rough time. But the funny thing is that many years later, I would go on to work in an environmental safety, health and safety investigation, and knowing what I do now, I would have taught that class so differently.
Yes. So I guess some of my colleagues in sociology of health would say that maybe I dumbed down courses, but I did try. I reduced the theory, made them more relevant, used a lot of examples. You have to use a lot of examples. One of the things that I probably found most useful was Evan Willis's description of the sociological imagination, and using sort of the 4 pillars to look at a practical example of what might face a nurse or other health professional in the course of their work. And you speak.
What you're saying? No, I was just going to say that what you're saying really resonates. I mean, I had a colleague from psychology contact me to say that they've just taken over a health course, and they wanted to know how to make it relevant because she recognised that these people she was working with would go often, they were mostly health practitioners.
Yes.
And, so I talked to her about the need to understand how to speak across cultures and not make assumptions, and to put ourselves in the eyes of other cultures and not judge them according to our own culture, and looking at trauma and how relationships and history in a country of origin overseas can impact how minorities deal with practitioners.
Yes. I mean, what I found was the students that I was teaching, by and large, were fairly conservative. We live in really quite a monocultural society in this town. And so I guess 2 of the most useful things that I found in my teaching was looking at how health is socially determined. So we would look at the relationship between poverty and health, rather than taking an individual view, saying, well, that person could improve their diet if they tried. I would then say, well, how much does it cost to buy a litre of low-fat milk compared to a litre of house brand in Coles or Woolies and things like that? And of course, the other thing was the culture, trying to see things from another person's point of view, putting yourself in the shoes of somebody who you say maybe doesn't speak English. I remember going into one lecture when we were talking about that, and I started out the lecture in my very bad French. And the students all looked at me as though I was absolutely mad. And I said, well, you know, that's how you've got to do it. You know, how would you feel if you were feeling sick and somebody came along and you couldn't understand a word they said? So I think, you know, sociology does give you a lot to offer students. If you think broadly and think about what sort of work, think about what sort of a nurse you might want to be treating you. What would you want she or he to know?
Well, it's interesting that because medical sociology, you know, sociology is constructed as really being a critique against the medical model. We spend a lot of time critiquing medical authority as sociologists, and probably Foucault's work is one of the most famous examples. You know, he critiqued medical practice and how medical knowledge is actually used to control different types of populations. So what you've talked about some of the practical benefits of sociology with your students, but how would we maybe, you know, you talked about coming with practical examples. How else might we work with medical practitioners, given that there's that antagonistic relationship, I guess you could say? And in particular, you know, I think when students read sociology, I can imagine it would be quite confronting to read those types of critiques if you're a nurse and you're going to be, and that's your practice.
I'd make a very strong distinction between nurses and doctors. Nurses were very critical of the medical model, very critical of medical dominance. Well, at least they should be. That was one of the underlying principles, you know, of the courses that we taught, was that nursing is holistic. It values the patient, or even at one stage we weren't even calling them patients. I think we were calling them clients, which somebody said makes them really sound like nurses and prostitutes, but never mind. So we, as a nursing lecturer, that sat very comfortably with sociology in terms of looking at the gender issues, looking at the medical dominance, looking at patients being told what to do rather than being self-determining creatures. So there wasn't that huge discrepancy there for me. One of the interesting things that I found was managing a whole lot of gender issues, because of course a lot of the critiques in the past has been, you know, men are doctors, women are nurses. We did have about 10% of our students were male, and they would be quite offended by, I guess, some of the more what we might call a feminist critique. We had to be very careful that, you know, when we were talking about male dominance, that we made it clear there was a spectrum, and that not all men were male chauvinist pigs, as the phrase used to be. That took quite some managing, because, you know, for all of our changing attitudes to gender, there's still very few men who go into nursing. But on the other hand, many of them rise very quickly in the profession.
That's interesting. And I think that aligns with some of the literature that I've read that actually shows that even in very feminized, if you like, fields where more women are employed, men are still paid better than women.
Yeah, and it goes back to who does the second shift when they get home, who can devote themselves more to their careers and taking on extra study, working extra hours, all that sort of thing.
So one of the reasons why I was keen to have you on is because I had a sociology graduate get in touch with me through Sociology at Work, and they were going back. They'd finished a bachelor degree and couldn't find work as a sociologist, and her story just broke my heart because she was now going into nursing thinking that her sociology degree, although she loved it, had been basically worthless. So, and I think she was doing nursing because she could see a clear career path. And this is one of the things that I really try and fight with through Sociology at Work is there are lots of job options for students. They just don't know where to look, and we don't really train them in where to look for work. So one of the fields where there's plenty of work is actually in health for sociologists. And this doesn't mean getting another degree. So we can support medical and health sociology by working in hospitals, working alongside medical practitioners, offering research consultancy, offering training. There's lots of work. So what are some of the strengths of having a sociology degree if somebody's interested in pursuing this line of work?
Well, having a broad view as to what causes health and illness, obviously. Having, I think, critical thinking. Hopefully a sociology degree has equipped a person with critical thinking skills and with a whole range of research skills. I believe very strongly that if we're looking at producing sociology graduates who are employable in a range of jobs rather than simply as academic lecturers, that they need to have quantitative research skills. Mm-hmm. These may not be a very highly advanced quantitative skills, but they certainly need to understand some basics of how you do quantitative research, how you write a good questionnaire, how you add up the results and come to a conclusion. Certainly qualitative skills are good too, but I think if we think about health sciences, one of the big changes over the last 20 years is that health sciences, all of them, have become very much evidence-based disciplines. Mm-hmm. You don't simply do what was done for the last 20 years because some senior nurse told you to do it. You've got to be able to give the evidence for why you're approaching a particular issue in the way it is. Mm. So that really takes quantitative skills. So quantitative skills, the ability to be non-judgmental, to be empathetic. Mm-hmm. Hopefully you gain something like those skills from a sociology degree. Mm-hmm. The ability to research an issue more generally, a literature review, for instance, mm-hmm. and to be able to write a well-argued piece, and to be able to write. I think another good skill is if you can write for a broader public. I think it's very good that we now have websites like The Conversation, where academics from a whole range of fields are learning to write, in a sense, for a broader public. So all of those things, I think a sociology degree can help to make a person employable. Certainly there are options when you've done a sociology degree. If you want to be a health practitioner, both nursing, medicine itself, and most of the allied health professions now offer master's level degrees for graduates. You go in with a degree in any field, and you then become a physiotherapist or a nurse or something like that in a reduced period of time. But I would say to anyone, never go into any of the health professions simply because it's going to give you a job. You've got to want to do that profession. I think in a similar way, even when I was teaching in the BA, we would look at where our graduates went, and it was one of those quite flexible BAs. It was often they would do a major in sociology and a minor in some other field, and it was often the minor that determined their ultimate profession. So they would do a major in sociology and had some, for instance, do a minor in marketing or in human resources, and they would end up doing that as their work, but being informed by sociology, and I guess choosing sociology because they loved it and because it challenged them. But it's not always a meal ticket, and perhaps when we're talking maybe to school leavers and things like that, we need to make it clear that for sociology to be your meal ticket, you're going to have to work at it very hard and back it up with appropriate other support subjects.
I think I would agree with you to a large extent. I think the other thing is I strongly believe that we could be teaching our graduates better about, those examples you talked about where you cache it around the practical skills, so you learn the theory and the concepts and the methods, and then always end with a little case study that is from the field. So, how would we use cultural relativity as a concept, in nursing, or how would we use social capital as an economist, or
yes.
whatever.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be really, really good. It would be a very interesting way of presenting sociology in a BA course.
Mm. I think
the other thing we also needed to do that we did very strongly in nursing that we certainly didn't do at in the BA course was actually teaching people how to apply for jobs. How to write a letter of application, how to write a statement addressing selection criteria. I've been working with a recent graduate in a mentorship relationship this year, and those things have been very difficult for her. I'd say to her, explain your doctorate in 3 sentences without using jargon. Mm-hmm. So I think sociology degrees need to improve the way they actually build in job-seeking skills.
I think you're right. I'd love to pick your brain off camera about this, because one of the next things I want to do is start to teach, or at least write more articles through Sociology at Work about how I got a job, or when I've had to hire people, so what do I look for? And I'd certainly like to invite more sociologists who hire applied sociologists to talk about these things, because
yes.
Yeah, it's something that we're kind of left to find our way, and it works for some of us, but it doesn't work for all of us. So I really appreciated your insights. We're almost out of time, but I did want to quickly just touch on the fact that another thing that I really like about your career is that it does demonstrate how malleable our skills are, and that many of us who don't continue in the academic path will end up doing really vastly different things. So you actually went off, and after a very long and successful career as a lecturer, you've gone off and started your own business. So did you want to just touch on how you used sociology in Clark's Clerks?
Yes. Yes, well, as you say, I'd had a long career as lecturing, and I thought it was time to move on, but I wasn't quite ready to completely retire. One of the skills I guess I developed over a long period of time was that I'm good at writing words. I can put together a good sentence. I'm also very good at proofreading, which I think is almost an inborn skill. You've got to be able to distinguish, very small mistakes and things like that. So during my years at work, it had always been me who would proofread the department's documents and the exam papers and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it slowly came to me that might be something that I could do as a part-time career when I finished with universities. And I saw an advertisement from a company that offered services to academics and others whose first language was not English, but who wanted to publish in English-speaking journals. And so basically I started doing some part-time work for them. You would get an article written by somebody, and you would have to put it into good English and make sure that the referencing was correct, all of those sorts of things. And I found I really liked doing that, and that I could do it well. And of course, sociology was good because you only ever edited in your own field. So I could do sociology and health sciences because you had to know the jargon, so to speak. You had to know the theoretical terms. You had to be able, for instance, in a qualitative paper, you wouldn't go in and edit the verbatim quotes because that's a no-no. So you have to know those sorts of things. And so I gradually sort of took on more work in that area and put my name about a bit, and have picked up a variety of work. Now the main thing I do is editing theses, but I still do some journal article work as well. And,
Wonderful.
yes, it's demanding work. I can't do it for 10 hours a day, but it gives me the opportunity to read a lot of really interesting stuff that's being produced by our wonderful upcoming graduates and emerging academics, and gives me a little bit of money to spend on myself for those sorts of things.
Oh, look, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really fun hangout.
I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. And look, I think there's a lot that we can draw from what you've said today, and you've hit a lot of issues that I'm really passionate about. So thank you for offering us another view of sociology. And hopefully our, particularly our graduates, can take away from your career that it's not the sociological imagination or our degrees that are lacking in terms of where we can go. It is about understanding how we can apply them and how we can demonstrate our worth in other fields. That's what I've taken away from.
That's really important. Thank you, Salika.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, colleagues. I'll be in touch soon through the blog, so this will come up on our blog over the next few days, and I'll do another video for you soon. And I do have some articles coming up about how to apply for work, how to look for work, and how to write a CV. But until then, have a great week, colleagues. Bye.